morning, everyone. Seems like a long time since I've been up here. That's what happens when you get moved to the first Sabbath of one month and the last Sabbath of the next month. But here I am, and I'm always praying that God leads me to a topic that will bless you. And this time I got some inspiration from a very unlikely source. I was reading the AFM magazine, and Leonda George has been in the Philippines for a long time, and she wrote an amazing article called Imprisoned in the March magazine. And I want to share with you just one of the paragraphs out of that. She says, as we minister in the Philippines, and that's not right. Okay, I'll read it to you. I don't know what happened to that slide. As we minister in the Philippines, we run into people all the time who cling to their culture and their old way of life. What was good enough for their forefathers is good enough for them. Does that sound familiar? They are bound by tradition and imprisoned by their origins. That is where they feel comfortable, but it is a false security. They are wrapped in chains and totally unaware of it. They are living the life of the condemned, turning away from the good news of salvation through Jesus that is in their midst. She concludes that article with some questions, and I thought you'd like to see them. She said, are you living in a delusion of security, but actually chained to this world? Are you truly convinced of where we are in Earth's history? Are you aware of your true condition? And that led me to a sentence that I hear all the time being involved in health ministry. The minute somebody hears that maybe they shouldn't eat this or maybe they shouldn't do that, here's the question or the comment that I get. My family has eaten, you fill in the blank there. Larry gave you many options of ideas. Okay, so my family has eaten whatever, for years, and they all live to old age. All right? Well, unfortunately, that is what the people in the Philippines are saying, right? This is how we've lived for years and hundreds of years, but they're chained, and I think that we can fall into that same trap. So today I'd like to start on a two-part thing of why we cannot live like our ancestors lived. And I've got a multitude of reasons, but we're only going to make it through about 2.5 before my time runs out today. The first one is that our ancestors led a very different type of lifestyle than we do. Have you noticed that? It does not resemble if you've had your grandparents or great-grandparents telling you stories about how they lived. My daily life doesn't resemble theirs hardly at all, except maybe getting up and eating, right? Okay, so most of them performed hard manual labor daily. This was not something they went out and did once in a while. And study after study has shown that you can actually eat a higher fat, higher calorie diet and you won't suffer the consequences if you are performing vigorous daily exercise. Now, they did an amazing study. There's been a lot of studies done, but one of the most famous was done in the 1970s. And vital statistics showed that heart disease was higher in males that came to the U.S. than their families that stayed in Ireland. So a whole host of them had settled in Boston. So they did this study in Boston, and they took brothers that still lived in Ireland with a brother who had moved to the U.S. And they compared how they ate, what they did for their jobs, smoking, drinking, you name it. There were 1,154 brothers enrolled in this study. So it was big. This was not just, let's compare 10 brothers here. They also had a whole host of control groups that they looked at. And they found some interesting results. There, am I still there? Okay. After completing the study, they found that even though the brothers in Ireland ate a higher fat diet, they weighed less and they had less heart disease. Why? Because the take-home message here is that they exercised more. They were out working in fields every day, whereas the Boston brothers were doing more desk work. They were not out laboring hard. So the take-home message is that if you want to live and work like your ancestors did 100 years ago, then you can eat like them, all right? But if you aren't, you can't without suffering the consequences. The second reason I'd like for us to think about this morning is that our food source is not the same as our ancestors experienced, for a multitude of reasons. Any guess when pesticides were first started to be used? I asked Larry this on the way to church. He was way off, so I hope you guys can guess better than this. All right, well, the first known pesticide was elemental sulfur dusting, used in ancient Sumer about 4,500 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. Did you know that? This is not something that just started happening and, oh, look where we've gotten. This has been going on a long time. I did a study on pesticide use, and it was truly amazing, all of the horrible, horrible things that we've used throughout the centuries. In the 15th century, they were using arsenic, mercury, and lead that were being applied to the crops. Well, where did that all go, right? Into the soil. And then, of course, we got DDT added in there. In the 1940s, we consider that the modern age of pesticide use because they started making synthetic pesticides. We also started using herbicides, and then that leads to the whole soil depletion. And we can't do an exhaustive study on that today, and I'm not going to try. But there have been a lot of studies done that have showed that the soil depletion has affected the plants, the way they've been bred. Well, just take a look at this study done at the University of Texas, that to make the plants provide a bigger yield and resist the pests and adapt to all sorts of climates, we've modified the plants so that they can manufacture a bigger yield and get to the market. That's the bottom line, right? Okay. So even though we can do that, this has not kept pace with the nutrients that the plants need. Now, there is a side of that disagrees. So I'm not trying to start a controversy here. You go and do some research, because there are those on the opposite side who say that plants won't grow and mature and produce if the soil is too depleted. So when I hear conflicting advice, I always turn to either the scriptures or Ellen White to try to clarify, right? So I have one quote to share with you about this, and you can decide what she's saying. The greater the length of time the earth has lain under the curse, the more difficult has it been for man to cultivate it and make it productive. So we're suffering the consequences of how man has abused this earth for a very long time. Even when we're making the wisest choices we can, we still are suffering. And the last reason I want to look at, just start on with you today as to why we cannot live like our ancestors, is because we're living in the Great Day of Atonement. Do we believe that? Right? Most of us can quote that sentence from Great Controversy. That's not a surprise to all of you. And on that day, I'm not going to read all of this because I'm running out of time, but take a look at that last sentence. It says, how much more essential in this antitypical Day of Atonement that we understand the work of our high priest and know what duties are required of us. You know, we always think of this as something Jesus did for us, and that is true. But there was something the children of Israel things they were supposed to be doing on that day. And this one sort of clarifies that. Every person was to afflict their soul while the work of atonement was going forward. All business was laid aside, and the whole congregation of Israel spent the day in solemn humiliation before God, with prayer, fasting, and deep searching of heart. Now, I think you all know about how to do the prayer and the deep searching of heart, but the conflict comes in about the fasting, correct? They fasted for a day, and we cannot possibly fast until Jesus comes, or we wouldn't live much longer, correct? So that's what I'm going to be talking about next time I'm up here. But in the meantime, I have some homework for all of you to take a look and start thinking about, what does that mean? What does fasting mean for us living in this Day of Atonement? And if you'll take a look at Leviticus 16 and Leviticus 23, it will give you some clues. So have a happy Sabbath, and I hope you can do your homework.